Love doesn't destroy you. It exposes the part of you that was never built to survive reality. You fall in love thinking you've discovered purity, something untouched by games, strategy, or control. But what they don't tell you is this. Love is the most dangerous transaction you'll ever enter, because it demands total investment before you even understand the terms. Machiavelli warned against this centuries ago. He said that no ruler should ever place trust before testing loyalty. Yet, in the theater of the heart, we do the exact opposite. We trust first, we test later, and by then, it's too late. You give your time, your empathy, your secrets. You hand over emotional currency without collateral. And when the market crashes, you call it betrayal. But betrayal isn't an act, it's an audit. It's life showing you the value of what you gave to someone who never earned it. You think you're being loving when you open yourself too soon, but what you're actually doing is revealing your price tag. Every act of vulnerability, when given prematurely, becomes a negotiation, one you're destined to lose. You call it love, but it's exposure. You call it connection, but it's information. And Machiavelli would have smiled quietly and said, "He who trusts without testing invites his own ruin." You see, the cruel truth is this. Most people don't fall in love, they fall into projection. You're not drawn to who they are, you're drawn to the reflection of who you need them to be. That's why, in the beginning, they seem perfect, because your mind is doing the painting, and they're simply standing still. But eventually, the image cracks, and that's when you start to test too late. You start asking questions, setting boundaries, protecting your space. But by then, the power balance has shifted. You're already emotionally indebted, and the collector always comes. Real love doesn't fear testing. It welcomes it, because testing reveals truth, and truth is the only soil where loyalty grows. You can't test a person who has nothing to hide, but try to test someone built on performance, and you'll see how fast affection turns to irritation. They'll call you paranoid, distrusting, cold. But you're not cold, you're conscious. You're refusing to gamble your peace for their validation. Machiavelli believed that trust is not a gift, it's a strategy. He saw relationships the way generals saw war. Before you form an alliance, you test for loyalty, ambition, and fear. Because in the moment of crisis, emotion collapses, only character remains. And here's what most never realize. Love doesn't reveal character, pressure does. You don't know someone through their affection. You know them through their reaction when you stop providing it. Stop replying instantly. Say no once. Express a boundary they don't control. Watch closely. If their warmth depends on your compliance, what you're experiencing isn't love. It's leverage. Love that cannot survive testing isn't love. It's illusion maintenance. It exists only as long as you play your role perfectly. But the moment you test it, when you question, when you pause, when you assert your independence, the illusion breaks. And that's the moment truth walks in, uninvited. Most people can't handle that. They'd rather keep pretending than confront what's real. Because truth demands adjustment, while illusion offers comfort. And in matters of love, comfort has destroyed more people than deception ever could. Machiavelli's wisdom was never about cruelty. It was about clarity. He didn't tell you to manipulate. He told you to measure. He didn't tell you to avoid trust. He told you to earn it slowly. Because only fools invest before testing. And in love, fools don't just lose money. They lose identity. So before you give your heart away, pause. Study their silences more than their words. Notice how they treat boredom, not excitement. See how they act when you disappoint them. And ask yourself the question most lovers avoid. Am I loved, or am I useful? If the answer scares you, you're finally beginning to wake up. Because love without testing isn't romance. It's emotional gambling, and the house always wins. The first lie you tell in love isn't to them. It's to yourself. You whisper it in the quiet of your own mind. This time, it feels different. You convince yourself that instinct is evidence, that chemistry is truth, that intensity equals depth. But what they don't tell you is, intensity is the disguise that infatuation wears when it's in a hurry to destroy you. Every manipulator knows this. They don't rush you because they're excited. They rush you because time is their enemy. The longer you have to think, the more you'll start to see. And seeing ruins the illusion. Machiavelli understood this rhythm of deception long before modern psychology gave it language. He wrote about seduction of the mind, not of the body, how a ruler, a lover, or a manipulator first earns your admiration, then your obedience. Admiration is the doorway. Once you admire someone, you stop questioning their intent. Once you stop questioning, control begins. That's why the first stage of every manipulation is flattery. They don't just praise you. They mirror you. They speak your language, mimic your pace, echo your wounds. They study what you crave and then offer it like medicine. Until dependency feels like connection. Here's the cruel truth. People don't fall in love with reality. They fall in love with relief. You meet someone who calms your chaos, who makes the noise in your head quiet for the first time in years, and you confuse that silence with safety. But that silence isn't peace, it's control. Because whoever has the power to silence your mind has the power to shape it. And you'll defend that illusion fiercely. You'll justify their red flags. You'll ignore your gut. Because acknowledging the truth means admitting you were never in control. And for the human ego, that's unbearable. Love, in its purest form, is supposed to free you. But when love becomes dependency, it chains you, and you call those chains attachment. That's why Machiavelli would say, before you invest your heart, test for equilibrium. Can you breathe without them? Can you stay calm when they pull away? If absence feels like death, then what you have isn't love, it's emotional indenture. You've traded autonomy for affection. You can't test love with words. You test it through distance. You test it through disagreement. You test it by withholding the very validation they feed on. Watch what happens when you say no. When you don't bend, don't explain, don't chase. If love collapses at the first sign of boundary, it was never love. It was an unspoken contract of convenience. And yet, we keep repeating the same mistake over and over. Because deep down, most people aren't looking for partners. They're looking for permission to feel worthy, seen, wanted. And when someone gives them that permission, they confuse it with love. That's the oldest trick in the book, and Machiavelli wrote the book. He'd say, asterisk, if you want to control a man, convince him you understand his pain. Asterisk, because once he feels understood, he stops protecting himself. That's not empathy. That's strategy. This is where self-deception blooms. You start calling red flags complexity. You start calling manipulation passion. You start calling dependency devotion. But understand this. Every time you excuse what you feel is wrong, you teach the other person what they can get away with. You turn your silence into permission. And when they finally betray you, they're not breaking your trust. They're honoring the boundaries you refuse to set. Machiavelli's wisdom in love is brutal because it removes the poetry. He doesn't talk about soulmates. He talks about alliances. He doesn't talk about forever. He talks about mutual benefit. To him, love is not about emotion, it's about endurance. And endurance cannot exist without testing. Because anyone can promise loyalty in calm seas. But it's the storm that reveals whether their ship was built to last. So test them, not out of paranoia, but out of principle. Because genuine love doesn't fear examination, only performative love does. Ask difficult questions. Watch how they handle honesty. See if their affection stays when admiration fades. The ones who love you for who you are will adapt. The ones who love you for what you give will vanish. Either way, you win. Because the goal isn't to protect love from pain. The goal is to protect your peace from illusion. And the moment you understand that difference, you stop begging to be chosen and start choosing yourself. You've been taught to see love as surrender, to give completely, to hold nothing back, to prove devotion by risking everything. But what they don't tell you is this: surrender without strategy isn't love. The sacrifice disguised as virtue. Machiavelli would call it emotional bankruptcy. When the heart gives more credit than the mind can afford. You invest first, test later, and call the resulting collapse fate. But it wasn't fate. It was a lack of due diligence. Love, when untested, creates emotional inflation. Feelings rise in value faster than the truth can support them. Every sweet word becomes a promise. Every shared secret becomes a bond. And soon, you're emotionally leveraged, one withdrawal away from collapse. It's not romance. It's risk. The difference between love that lasts and love that destroys is this: the wise measure before they merge. The unwise confuse intensity for certainty and drown. Machiavelli would tell you, every alliance must be evaluated by its profit, not its passion. In politics, he meant stability. In relationships, it means alignment. You must ask, does this person add clarity to your life or confusion? Do they strengthen your self-discipline or erode it? Do they respect your solitude or fear it? Because love built on need is parasitic. It feeds on your emotional energy until you confuse survival with connection. That there's a reason manipulative lovers move fast. They know testing takes time, and time exposes patterns. Testing slows desire. Desire clouds logic, and logic ruins illusions. So they rush. They talk about destiny, about never feeling this before, about the universe sending you signs. They romanticize urgency. And you mistake emotional acceleration for authenticity. But urgency is just pressure dressed up as passion. Pressure to choose. Pressure to prove. Pressure to commit before you understand who you're committing to. Here's the dark truth. People reveal their character most clearly when you stop making them comfortable. You'll never know their loyalty while you're feeding their ego. You'll only know it when you feed their limits. Ask for space, they'll show their insecurity. Disagree with their idea, they'll show their control. Fall silent, they'll show their fear of irrelevance. Because emotional stability doesn't react. It observes. Machiavelli saw loyalty not as emotion but as incentive. He believed people act faithfully only as long as it benefits them. That truth applies in power and in love. But instead of seeing that as cynicism, see it as clarity. It doesn't mean people can't love deeply. It means love must be anchored in something stronger than emotion. Mutual respect, aligned values, shared purpose. Without those anchors, every wave of desire will drag you into chaos. Testing, then, isn't cruelty. It's calibration. It tells you not how much someone loves you, but how they love. Because some love through freedom, some love through control, and some love only through reflection, meaning they only love you as long as you mirror their needs. When you stop mirroring, the affection fades, and you realize it was never love. It was self-worship in disguise. You think the pain of heartbreak comes from losing them. But the real pain comes from losing the version of yourself that existed in their illusion. That version of you was full of faith, hope, and belief in a world that rewarded sincerity. But sincerity without strategy is self-betrayal. And Machiavelli would remind you, he who loves without precaution invites the cunning to feast upon his soul. Testing doesn't make you heartless. It makes you sovereign. Because sovereignty in love isn't about control over others. It's about control over access to your inner peace. Not everyone deserves entry. Not everyone can handle proximity to your truth. That's why detachment is sacred. It's not the absence of emotion. It's emotion under command. So test not because you doubt them, but because you value yourself. Because the cost of ignorance in love is always higher than the cost of caution. And when you finally learn that truth, you stop asking, do they love me? And start asking, does their love sustain my peace? Only one of those questions leads to freedom. You were taught that love is about patience, about understanding, about giving more when the other gives less. But what they never taught you is that unconditional giving without observation is not love. It's blindness disguised as virtue. The world doesn't reward kindness when it's unguarded, consumes it, and in love, that consumption feels almost sacred until it leaves you hollow. You see, the more you give, the more the human mind starts to rewrite the story. You think generosity builds connection, but to the ungrateful, generosity builds entitlement. And once they feel entitled to your empathy, your silence, your forgiveness, they stop seeing it as a gift. They start seeing it as their right. Machiavelli understood this paradox long before modern psychology ever named it. He said, mercy is only virtuous when it maintains order. Translated into love, kindness must have boundaries. Otherwise, it turns into weakness dressed as warmth. Because when you teach someone that your love is unconditional, you've also taught them that your limits are optional. They stop earning you. They start using you. You don't notice it at first. It begins subtly. Missed calls, broken promises, words that hurt followed by apologies that soothe. You tell yourself, they're just human. But that's not forgiveness. That's emotional rationalization, the mind's way of protecting its own bad investment. The dark psychology of attachment works like this. Your brain learns to equate pain with meaning. The more you suffer for them, the more valuable they feel. It's not love. It's cognitive dissonance. Your heart trying to justify its loyalty to a losing cause. And that's when the reversal begins. You start calling your silence maturity. You call your exhaustion commitment. You call your fear of losing them loyalty. But Machiavelli would whisper, what you call loyalty, they call leverage. Because in every unbalanced relationship, there's one who fears losing, and one who profits from being feared. You think you're being kind by holding on. But real kindness sometimes means walking away, not out of anger, but out of awareness. Because awareness is the most dangerous thing you can possess in a world built on illusion. The moment you see clearly, manipulation loses its grip. That's why manipulators thrive on confusion. They blur lines, twist meanings, make guilt feel like morality. They train you to doubt your own perception, because a confused heart is an obedient one. Here's the cruel symmetry of love. The more you seek validation, the less you receive respect. The more you chase peace externally, the more war you invite internally. Because love, without testing, always leads to emotional servitude. And when servitude becomes habit, you'll start mistaking survival for devotion. You'll stay not because you're loved, but because you're afraid of starting over. That fear is their weapon, but it's also your mirror. Because what you fear losing in them is often the part of yourself you abandon to keep them. So test your kindness. Not by removing it, but by redirecting it. Give but watch. Forgive but remember. Empathize but evaluate. Love deeply but keep one eye open for imbalance. Because true love doesn't need blindness to survive. It thrives in awareness, in accountability, in mutual recognition. Machiavelli would have called this strategic benevolence. Be kind but never predictable. Be loyal but never dependent. Be generous, but never to the point where your giving becomes someone else's entitlement. Because once kindness becomes expected, it loses its moral weight. And when love loses respect, it begins to rot. Most people think the end of love is betrayal. It's not. The end of love is disinterest, when one side stops trying because they already know you won't leave. That's the quiet death. No screaming, no closure. Just slow emotional erosion until you're left wondering when exactly affection turned into apathy. That's why Machiavelli's wisdom sounds cold but saves lives. He'd tell you, better to be feared than ignored. Not because fear is power, but because being ignored is the surest sign you've given too much without return. So the next time you feel that impulse to overextend, to prove, to beg for reciprocation, stop. Ask yourself, are you loving them or training them to devalue you? Because the moment you realize your kindness is being weaponized, that's when you stop being the prey of emotion and start becoming the master of your own peace. And that's when everything changes. There comes a moment in every broken lover's life, a night when silence is louder than any goodbye. You stare at your own reflection and realize it was never about them. It was about the parts of you that wanted to be chosen so badly. You forgot to choose yourself. That realization burns. It strips you down, forces you to face the truth you kept running from. That love, without testing, becomes an emotional gamble. And the currency you spend is self-respect. Machiavelli would have seen this not as tragedy, but as a necessary awakening. He wrote that power is maintained not through cruelty, but through clarity. And love, when seen clearly, is the most revealing test of all. Because in love, people don't show you who they are. They reveal what they want. Some want peace, some want power, and some only want control. That's why you test before you invest. Not because you distrust humanity, But because you understand its patterns. Let's be honest. The world doesn't reward purity. It rewards awareness. It rewards the one who can see the game and still play with grace. Love is no different. It's a negotiation between your emotions and your standards, between what you feel and what you allow. And every time you choose emotion over evidence, you write another chapter in your own downfall. But when you choose awareness over impulse, you rise. You don't become colder, you become sovereign. Here's the Machiavellian paradox. The one who controls love doesn't chase it. They attract it through stability, because stability feels like safety, and safety feels like power. You can't command love through emotion, but you can command respect through restraint. When you stop begging for loyalty and start expecting it through your standards, everything shifts. You stop being an option and become a measure. You stop being a chapter in someone's story and become the test they either pass or fail. So how do you test before investing? You observe patterns, not promises. Words are performances. Patterns are confessions. Watch how they handle boredom, not excitement. How they act when you disagree, not when you flatter. How they treat you when you're silent, not when you're useful. That's where truth hides. In the unscripted moments, in the space between affection and attention. And once you see the truth, you hold the power to decide. Will you proceed, or will you protect yourself? That's the essence of Machiavellian wisdom in love. Not manipulation, but strategic awareness. Because awareness is the purest form of power. People will call you heartless for walking away early. They'll call you cold for not forgiving endlessly. But understand, that's how the untested interpret boundaries. Let them misunderstand you. You're not built to please. You're built to discern. Machiavelli would smile at that, because discernment is what separates the wise from the wounded. In the end, the most powerful person in love isn't the one who's never hurt. It's the one who learned from the hurt and turned it into vision. Because when you finally see that love is not about completing someone, but about mirroring their nature, you stop asking, "What do they think of me?" and start asking, "What does their behavior reveal about them?" That's the final mirror, the one you hold up not to the world, but to yourself. When you can look into that reflection and say, "I know how to love without losing myself," then you've passed the test, not of love, but of wisdom. Because in the end, the one who tests before investing doesn't avoid pain. They transcend it. They see through charm, through chaos, through the illusions of affection, and stand untouched by the storm. That's not cynicism. That's enlightenment through experience. That's Machiavelli's true lesson, not to fear love, but to understand it so deeply that it can never destroy you again. Asterisk, love freely, but think strategically. Asterisk, that's the code. That's the path. That's the dark mirror thought. The wisdom that turns heartbreak into sovereignty.